The Detroit Lions are one of the most fascinating teams this offseason, and that's just purely off of draft capital and what moves they could potentially make. The Lions went 9-8 last season, and trust me, it wasn't always pretty, but the offense really was one of, if not the most exciting offense in football. The only problem with that is the defense, not so much. They really sucked, and that's a big reason why they didn't do better last year. The Lions are now in a good spot to make some noise this offseason and continue to build up that roster with the hopes that they can compete at a high level next year. The Lions hold 2 first-round picks at the draft, making them kind of a big deal this year. They have their own, which is at 18, but Detroit also has the 6th overall pick, which belonged to the Rams. The Lions got that in the Matthew Stafford trade, and that gives the Lions the chance to take a top quarterback potentially, or at the very least just build up a pretty good roster. The idea of taking a shot on a quarterback definitely makes some sense, don't get me wrong, but I just don't think that's the right route to go here for the Lions. Jared Goff was plenty good last season, and the Lions have plenty of other holes that need to be filled, especially on that defensive side of the ball. If the Lions aren't absolutely sold on a quarterback that falls to them, they should just work on building the roster up. Now, mock drafts for the Lions are kind of all over the place, but the expectation seems to be that Detroit will go with one of those top defensive guys in the class. Mel Kiper has the Lions taking Will Anderson at 6. Being able to pair him up with Aiden Hutchinson on the other side would be lethal. Anderson actually led the country in pressures in 2021. That same year, Hutchinson was tearing it up with 14 sacks at Michigan. Anderson had 17.5. Todd McShay has Anderson off the board a bit earlier to the Cardinals, so he has the Lions taking Tyree Wilson. Pretty similar message here. He'd help build a lethal pass rush, and he did just have 7 sacks for the 2nd consecutive season and has insane arm length and power. Daniel Jeremiah and Lance Zierlein both have the same mock at 6. Devin Witherspoon. The Lions clearly have a big need at cornerback, and he would fill that void. He's not super big, but he does have good instincts and ball skills, and Detroit is just in desperate need of a corner. Both Kiper and McShay have the same guy mocked at 18 to the Lions, and that's Bijan Robinson. It makes some sense with DeAndre Swift, who really hasn't been able to stay healthy and will be a free agent next offseason. Plus, Robinson could be a really valuable receiving option, unlike David Montgomery, who is also coming off of a down season. Zierlein also has the Lions going with an offensive piece too, but it's tight end Michael Mayer. He's a ball hawk and could be big in not only the receiving game, but also in the rushing attack. Jeremiah has the Lions sticking with the defense with Kalijah Kancey. He'd be able to help the Lions pass rush and just be a good addition to that line. Past the first round, the Lions also have 2 seconds after the Vikings traded one to them and he traded for TJ Hawkinson. So Detroit has plenty of draft capital to help build the roster. The Lions have had a pretty busy offseason, bringing in some very important pieces for the future, but also cleaning house where it's needed. And yes, I'm talking about Jeff Okudah. He was the 3rd overall pick in 2020, and he just hasn't worked out well at all in Detroit. Okudah dealt with some injuries and poor play, and the Lions ultimately traded him to the Falcons for a 5th rounder. I assume in a move to combat that, Detroit did sign CJ Gardner-Johnson to a 1-year, $8 million deal. He's coming off of a great season on that absolutely stacked Eagles defense with 6 interceptions. A kind of cool signing to see was actually Graham Glasgow, who's making his return to Detroit. He was with the Lions before his 3-year stint in Denver. He wasn't the only guy to return to Detroit either though. Marvin Jones Jr. is back with the Lions on a 1-year, $3 million deal. He had some success briefly in Jacksonville, but now he's back where it all started. Finally, the Lions signed David Montgomery, which, by the way, is going to look so weird. After watching him rock that Bears jersey for so long and now seeing him switch to that Detroit blue is kind of bizarre. He inked a 3-year, $18 million deal, which is honestly too much if you ask me. Still, he rushed for over 800 yards in every year of his career, and the Lions really needed to replace Jamal Williams. touchdowns. The Lions' offense was really impressive last season, even without their prized first rounder. Jared Goff had one of the best years of his career with 4,400 yards and 28 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. Luckily, he actually had a true number one to throw to, Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's really turned out to be a very reliable wide receiver in Detroit. Last year, he ended up with 1,161 yards and 6 touchdowns. Khalif Raymond has also become a reliable threat. He's had over 500 yards in the past 2 seasons, despite bouncing around in the 5 years prior after being an undrafted guy. The line was also really solid last season, mainly thanks to Penei Sewell being at that right tackle spot and developing really well, if not perfectly. Taylor Decker held it down at left tackle, and Frank Ragnow stays killing it at center. They'll both be back this upcoming season. There aren't really any good names to bring up on the defensive side of the ball. It was, and as of now, probably still is, that bad. That being said, Aiden Hutchinson is the big name. He was a second overall pick last year, and he already made a big impact as a rookie with 9.5 sacks. I fully expect him to just keep getting better. However, the Lions' offseason did just get a bit worse after 4 players were suspended for violating the league's gambling policy. Jameson Williams, Quintez Cephas, and Stanley Berryhill. All receivers were suspended alongside safety CJ Moore. Cephas and Moore are suspended indefinitely, but Williams and Berryhill both only got 6-game suspensions. They had bet on non-NFL games, but did so at a team-related facility, which is why it isn't a full-year suspension. Regardless, that's a big loss for Detroit, especially Williams, which I'm just so upset about this. He was likely in line for a big production jump. He was a 12th overall pick a year ago, but spent most of the season on injured reserve, still recovering from that torn ACL he suffered in the national championship. He ended the year with only 1 catch, although it did go for a 41-yard touchdown. Still, regardless, I'm sad that I'm not going to get to see him play a whole season. The Lions definitely have something here. It's been a long, bad time for Detroit fans, but I think there is some hope, finally. For one, how can you not love Dan Campbell? He just seems like a fun guy to play for, and he's kind of a little crazy, I'm not even going to lie.
And when you punch us back, we're going to smile at you, and when you knock us down, we're going to get up, and on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off.
What?
All right, and on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap.
Rooting for Jared Goff is super easy because this almost feels like kind of a revival arc for him now. Nobody expected much of him after the Rams, and in that trade for Matt Stafford, the Lions actually wanted him. He was great last season. And no, I don't think he's the elite future guy, but Detroit is happy enough to have him, especially while they're building here for the future. I don't think drafting a quarterback is the right call this year, but if the Lions are absolutely in love with someone, I can understand it. You could take a guy like Anthony Richardson or Will Levis and have them sit for a year, but who really knows? Like I said earlier, I was really looking forward to seeing what the offense could look like with Jameson Williams, but that's just gonna have to wait until about mid-season now. Amon-Ra St. Brown is still that dude though, and I think the run game will continue to be really good, mainly because that offensive line is crazy good. I think everyone knows that the big problem was the defense, and even Detroit knows that. Aiden Hutchinson has definitely shown some promise, and I personally think that both of those first rounders will go to defensive pieces if the Lions are going to be smart about it. They have so many holes to fill, but could also still absolutely win the NFC North this season. The Lions ended last season on a roll and surprised a lot of people while doing it. If the pieces can continue to run well together and Detroit continues to improve and drafts correctly, watch out for the Lions.